Our next speaker is a respected expert in trauma-informed nutrition, dedicated to helping individuals and families heal through science-based nutritional care. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Nicole Lawrence.
Hello again, you guys. I'm going to start by telling you a little story. So many years ago, I was talking to a patient, and she was living with diabetes, and she was telling me about the challenge that she was having with managing her blood sugars. She said, "You know, Nicole, I know what I need to do to take care of myself, but I'm just having a tough time. I don't feel like exercising. I'm stressed all the time. I'm not sleeping well. When I go to my families, they tease me if I try to eat a salad." And so she said, "I'm just frustrated with this whole thing, and I just can't do this really well." So as we continued talking, we delved a little bit deeper into what was going on with her, and she started crying. So I asked her, I said, "Well, why are you crying? What's going on? Share with me." And she said, "I'm crying because my grandmother died, and I'm having a tough time with her death." So we talked a little bit more, and I asked her, I said, "Well, how long ago did your grandmother die?" What do you think her response was to me? If she said about 6 months, raise your hands if you think she said 6 months. She died about 6 months ago. How about a year? Couple of year? 2 years? 3? She said 5 years. 5 years ago, her grandma died, but she was still speaking as though it had recently happened. What that taught me is something really important, and that is trauma is very individual. How we experience it is very individual. What is traumatic for you may not be traumatic for me. And the thing about trauma is that we have our own personal stories to tell as it's connected to trauma. And when we think about it, so do our ancestors who've experienced trauma. But trauma isn't just with us. Trauma lives throughout our lives, and it's expressed in our plate. And so today, what I want to talk about is how do we bridge that divide between trauma and our nutritional health. So what is trauma? It's basically any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, a feeling of helplessness, dissociation, confusion, and it produces other disruptive feelings. And those feelings are really intense enough to have a long-lasting negative effect on our, if only this would work, attitudes or behaviors, there we go, and also other aspects of our functioning. So I want you to think about that for a moment and picture what trauma is experienced like in little kiddos who do experience trauma, and then also in us as we grow up. Now here's the thing, y'all. Trauma comes in different forms, and some of us may have experienced some type of trauma. One big one, when we think about the Caribbean community and the African community, is historical trauma. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see how trauma might affect us, right? When we talk about cultural suppression, that type of trauma still lives with us throughout our whole lives. Other types of trauma we may experience is sexual trauma, economic trauma in the form of poverty, workplace discrimination, and hunger. So when we think about the people who've just experienced the hurricane in Jamaica and other countries, think about what's going on with those people who no longer have access to food. It is a massive trauma, down to the 1-year-old child who cannot get food. It's a massive trauma to them. But then we also have family trauma. One of the things we often don't think about when it comes to trauma is parental migration. Many of our family members leave us to move to a better place. And they're gone for a year, 2 years, 5 years working, and they've left a 1-year-old child, a 5-year-old child. That's traumatic to that child. So it's sometimes we don't think of those things. And like in the case of my patient, it had to do with the death and loss of a family member. There was one thing I didn't mention to you, actually. The reason why this situation with my patient was so traumatic, it's not just because her grandma died, but it's in her culture. The practice is, after someone dies, you grieve for a period of time, and then you have to get rid of everything that belongs to that family member in order for that person to transition to the next life. That is traumatic. That's why she was having such a difficult time with her grandma's loss, because she could not grieve in the way that was germane to her. Make sense? But then we also have relationship trauma and other forms of trauma like bullying, war, and community violence. How many people can you think of who live in communities that are dangerous, where you have to be told, make sure you're not walking down that street, make sure you're not out at dark, right? Community violence. Now, more than likely, everyone in this room has experienced trauma, either individually or their family member has, and it therefore influences how that family member engages with us, or our parents, and it's influenced how they have raised us. So it's just something to consider. When you've been exposed to trauma for a long time, though, you develop something called toxic stress. And toxic stress is basically where we have had trauma exposure for a long time without anyone mitigating in that experience. And someone who is usually older than us is who helps us to navigate experiences that are difficult for us. But when we have that toxic stress in our bodies, there are a couple of things that happen to us. Well, physically, we crave sugars. So if you find that you got a sweet tooth and suddenly it's like, oh, my kids are stressing me out and all these things are going on, and you want sugar, you want candy, you want chocolates, you want caffeine, those are some of the impacts of toxic stress on the body. But of course, what that's going to result in is energy highs and then deep crashes where you suddenly feel really, really moody. Sounds familiar? Yes. Toxic stress impacts the gut. In fact, what it does is it destroys the lining of our gut. And digestion happens in the gut. The absorption of our nutrients happens in the gut. We can develop a condition called leaky gut, where we actually get holes in our gut, and therefore the nutrients cannot be absorbed normally. Serotonin and dopamine, which are our happy hormones, can no longer be produced, and so we end up developing health complications, mental health conditions, all because we don't have those things being developed in the gut. Then we have diarrhea and constipation that we can experience, or even things like irritable bowel syndrome. So high stress, that toxic stress, leads to the production of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And when you develop high levels of cortisol, guess what, y'all? You're not sleeping well. You're stressed out, you're gaining weight, you're putting on extra fat. You basically feel terrible when you have high levels of cortisol. And what we know is high cortisol levels, it literally damages the developing brain. So think about those kiddos in Jamaica right now who are living a high-stress life where their brains are still developing. If that stress continues on and on and on, it will result in poor complications to their health as they get older. The other thing that can develop is a high need for control surrounding our food, which can result in disordered eating patterns, where we're binging and purging, where we're dieting, we're doing the cabbage soup diet, we're doing the watermelon juice diet, we're doing all these different things just to have control over our health, and that can actually result in some major eating disorders. All right, so what do we need to do on this pathway to healing? We have to have a safe situation in our home. We have to have safety at the dinner table. So we have to have a peaceful environment in our family. We have to reclaim family dinners. So if you're not having family dinners, y'all, it's time to reclaim them. That's a pathway to healing. We must have stability and honor the principle that food is good for the blood. You must have heard that before, and that's because it is. So you got to get those whole foods. You got to get the ground provisions. Those are important. You got to get the plant remedies. You got to get the ginger tea and, all those things, lemongrass teas. Those are things that's going to help to create a stable environment. Almost there, y'all. And when we have steady energy, it means we can calm our nervous system. And then there's something else we have to have in our food, and that is flavor. Y'all remember at lunchtime when you were approaching that door back there, and you smell the curry goat, and you smell the jerk chicken? What happened? Didn't y'all suddenly start feeling good? There was like a pep in your step, and everyone was happy. I remember standing in the lunch line. Everyone was pretty much happy. Why? Because the sense of the food, the actual sense of the food, they innervate our sinuses, and they go straight to our brain, and they make us feel good. And food is not just food, y'all. Food is memories. So when you stepped at that door and you smelled that food, you were like, I'm back home. That is flavor. So when you cook, you got to cook with spices, you got to cook with seasonings, and our food is rich with spices and seasonings. So the garlic and the onions, right, and the shallots and the celery and the Scotch bonnet peppers, you got to include those things in your food because they help to calm the nervous system. Very important. So to bridge the divide that's caused by trauma, we got to do certain things. We got to honor ourselves. What does that look like? Take care of ourselves. If we have unresolved trauma, you guys, it is time to start working on yourself. And if you do. How do you know this? Because you get triggered. You go to your family gathering and your family member says, and those claws come out. When you see that happening, you have experienced trauma that is not yet resolved. And it doesn't have to be big traumas. It can be little traumas that you've experienced that you just haven't resolved. So we have to prioritize our emotional and physical well-being. Then we have to honor our families. Protect your families, and it starts by making sure you protect your children. You gotta protect your children, because if they grow up and they've been traumatized, and they get into the same cycle as you did, then they will inevitably impact their own little ones. So you gotta protect your family heritage. Then the next thing is we have to honor our communities. How do we do that? We gotta have those conversations about the impact of trauma on our communities. We have to start talking. You have to start talking about your kids. You have to start talking in your churches about how trauma is impacting you. You have to discuss how you can return to more of a plant-based focused diet where you're eating simple food with delicious spices, delicious flavors. We have to purchase locally as much as we can. Purchase local food. Avoid the canned stuff. Avoid the tin stuff. Avoid the box stuff. Avoid the processed stuff. We have to eat local foods that are simple. And then plant your vegetables. I know here you guys are cold, but however you can plant in your little greenhouse, plant your own vegetables or participate in a community garden. Because just getting your hands in the dirt, it is relaxing, it is calming, it is soothing. And get your kiddos to be involved in that too. And then if you have not started doing this, share your family recipes. Because sometimes grandma knows how to cook this sweet potato pudding, and your auntie knows to cook pone, and everybody knows to do something different. But share your family recipes so your legacy lives on. So I want you guys to say something with me on this slide. Can y'all see it? Because this is important for you. And I want, as you read this, personalize this, because it will make a difference as you try to prevent trauma within your families and as you try to enhance your lives with your food and nutrition. So we're going to read this together. Okay, here we go. When we bring peace and understanding to our plate, we are not just eating a meal, we are disrupting a cycle of trauma and strengthening our communities. Thank you guys for listening. Take care of yourselves.